movement to a survive and thrive movement. I'll talk more about that in a minute. I'd like to describe the importance of an early life focus, discuss its relevance of a life course perspective, and then explain what I mean when I mention the nurturing care framework. All right, so first I'm going to focus on this shift I'm talking about from survive to survive and thrive. So about 20 years ago, there was a very important set of articles that came out in The Lancet that described where and why 10 million children are dying every year globally. And this really sparked something important. It sparked the child survival movement. And interventions, evidence-based interventions, were introduced or scaled throughout the world, targeting child survival. And about 10 years after that started, there was another article that came, a follow-up article that came out in The Lancet that described a actually very significant decline from around 11 million child deaths in 2000 to about 6 million in 2015. So a 53% decline in child deaths globally. So that was, that was an important advancement. Around the same time, people started publishing papers and asking the question, great, it's great that so many children, more children are surviving, but what happens to the children who survive? So there was another article or set of articles that came out in 2007 that reported that 200 million children under the age of 5 years in low and middle income countries are not fulfilling their developmental potential, and that our set of interventions to address survival required expansion to also address ensuring that children do well across their lives as well. And then a few years after that, there was another series that came out that talked about, how would we do this? How do we address the issue of not just survive, but also survive and thrive? And the suggestion was to focus on interventions that had an early life focus, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Recognize the relevance of the life course perspective, and then also integrate programs that focus on nurturing care. And again, I'll talk about that in a minute. So I'm going to explain the importance of an early life focus. As you all probably know, there's a lot of growth and development that occurs across various tissues and systems in a child's body very, very early in life. And that includes weight and linear growth, but it also includes a lot of brain development. This is just a image that kind of shows, I put a big red box around all the brain development that is occurring between the point of conception, the point of conception to around 2 years of age. There's a lot of cell expansion, migration, myelination. A lot of our brain development is happening here. This brain development, this rapid brain development, also continues to develop through 5 years of life as well too. And then if you look across this image and you kind of plot yourself in terms of your age, so like I'm 50, you would see how much brain development is happening in adulthood. And you can see that most of it occurs early in life. So in addition to rapid growth, physical growth, there's a lot of rapid brain development. So it's really important to focus on interventions in this period. And also just the more environmental risks, such as poor nutrition or poor health care or lack of education or stimulation, the more environmental risk a child is exposed to, the more likely it is to impair their physical growth and their brain development. All right, so I'm now going to talk about that in relation to the life course perspective. So, it's really, the life course perspective is important. It really adds to the significance of the early life focus, because we know that what happens early on in life, so that could be a parent's well-being, the well-being and nutrition of a pregnant woman, or the early nutrition or learning environment for an infant or a young child, that all those environmental factors provides the genetic blueprint for development across the life course. So this blueprint shapes a child's future health, their learning potential, how well they do in school, and also ultimately their earning potential and how they do as an adult, and how they are able to care for their own family and children. This is just another way to look at this or think about this. And this is a very simplified figure, but this just kind of shows you, it depicts a very healthy developmental trajectory from conception to adulthood. So for example, if a child is born, adequate size, and continues to be exposed to a healthy environment and a safe environment across childhood, they will be more likely to grow up to be healthy and well-functioning adults. On the other hand, if children are born small or are exposed to continued risk factors in childhood without interventions, they're more likely to be exposed to a negative trajectory and at increased risk for poor outcomes in adulthood, leading to something called the intergenerational cycle of poor health and nutrition. But so I'm trying to shift this, but like I said, it's not that simple. Children never go on this line or that line. All people fluctuate someplace in the middle. And this fluctuation is really, really important to acknowledge. So for example, this green line, the green line on top represents that perfect healthy trajectory that is basically in theory. No one ever experiences a perfect life, right? And then the red line represents this unhealthy trajectory. But even if a child, for example, is born small, if they're exposed to protective factors after birth, for example, optimal breastfeeding behaviors or optimal infant feeding practices or stimulation in the home, they can be bumped up and up closer to the healthy trajectory. They can go, they can shift off that more negative trajectory to a healthy trajectory. And then again, the more, protective factors they get along the way versus negative factors, the more likely they are to have a healthy developmental trajectory across their life course. So now I just want to talk about the nurturing care framework and how that relates to all of this. So nurturing care, the concept is that nurturing care promotes health and learning, enabling children to, yes, survive, but also, and very importantly, enabling children to thrive. And the nurturing care framework acknowledges the need for integrated protective factors and services, such as adequate nutrition, responsive parenting, exposure to a safe and secure environment, opportunities for early learning, and good health. But in order for all of these, to occur and to occur simultaneously, you need an enabling environment for that. You need an enabling environment for nurturing care. And that enabling environment includes caregivers' capabilities, empowered communities to provide support to caregivers and children, supportive services, for example, like ANC services, and then also at the highest level, enabling policies that support all these other levels. And then there is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And these are goals for 2030 that UN member states have accepted. And they're big goals, like no poverty by 2030, zero hunger, economic growth, reduced inequities. But in order for us to achieve or work towards these goals or to get closer to these goals, the protective factors for children have to occur early across childhood and have to be, an integrated set of protective factors. It can't just be good nutrition or good education. They have to be exposed to varying different protective factors that fall within that nurturing care framework. And countries, the thought is that countries should invest in early childhood programs that really bring in that nurturing care framework, that all those integrated components, in order to lay the foundation for a brighter future for not just the children, but also for families and for society at large. I'm a nutritionist, so I always do like to focus back in on nutrition a bit. So I just wanted to highlight, how some of these components like nutrition actually can be, seamlessly almost integrated with the other components as well. So one example is optimal infant, young child feeding practices. The fact that they require all 5 nurturing care components to also be realized. So to have optimal infant and young child feeding practices realized, one thing is you have to have support for things like exclusive breastfeeding to support adequate nutrition. But infant and young child feeding practices also require support for the introduction of safe complementary foods. So it also digs into this security and safety element. And then also optimal infant and young child feeding practices require support for responsive care or responsive feeding, that parents and caregivers are responsive to child's hunger and fullness. So that ties back to responsive caregiving. So you can see how one thing that seems very nutrition focused can actually integrate several components of this nurturing care framework. I did want to talk about nutrition and development and how they're integrated in a very simple way. So during the first year of life, children are really developing rapidly in terms of their skills and their eating skills. And at the same time, their nutrition needs are changing. So for example, between 0 and 6 months, basically a child's skills in terms of eating is just this suckling and sucking and swallowing. And so they require liquids, really liquids only based on their development. But liquids like breast milk is not only appropriate developmentally for the child based on their skills, but also has all the nutrition they need to grow and develop. By 6 to 7 months of age, children often start to develop this, what they call munching. So they start moving their mouth around, kind of looks like they want to eat. And they also start to lose their gag reflex. So when you put food in their mouth, they will stop gagging at it. So at this point, they're developmentally ready to start eating mashed or pureed foods, such as vegetables, fruits, potatoes, meats, things like that. By 7 to 12 months, they start to be able to bite and chew. Some get teeth. They start clearing things with their across their lips, and they can start having mashed and chopped foods and start even feeding themselves, which is another developmental milestone. It actually starts to target their fine and gross motor skills. And then between 12 and 24 months of age, they develop this rotary chewing movement and they get some stability in their jaw. And so they can start transitioning to family foods as long as those are chopped up, so they're not a choking hazard. So again, you can see that across the first year, the need for different types of foods and more diversity and things like that and increased quantity changes, but also does their skill set to eat these foods. And so part of optimal infant and young child feeding practices is also encouraging and teaching children to develop new skills that will enable them to eat these different foods. Just a little bit about, since we're talking about infant and young child feeding practices, about WHO breastfeeding recommendations, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. They include a recommendation for initiation of breastfeeding within the first hour of life to support exclusive breastfeeding to 6 months. Recommendations include breastfeeding on demand as often as the child wants, day and night. This is an element of responsive feeding. And then from 6 months on, children should begin to eat safe and adequate complementary foods while continuing to breastfeed for up to 2 years and beyond. And this matters. Breastfeeding really matters because it's really the perfect nutrition in terms of promoting child's growth and their early brain development. It protects them from infectious diseases and also protects them from actually obesity and non-communicable diseases later in life. In terms of recommended actions, this enabling environment for breastfeeding, recommendations include to limit or to not allow formula marketing, to support maternal paid leave or paternal paid leave, to strengthen health systems, and to support mothers, in terms of family support and community support. And people often think breastfeeding is so simple, but it does require support, and the scope of the problem, it's still a problem that exists. Globally, only about 38% of infants are exclusively breastfed. I think in Indonesia it's a little higher, but it's similar. And then suboptimal breastfeeding actually contributes to about 800 infant deaths a year. So it just kind of gives you a sense of the burden and the problem that still exists. In terms of guiding principles for complementary feeding, the issue of timing is important. Complementary feeding should be introduced when the need for energy and nutrients cannot be fully provided through exclusive breastfeeding alone. Also, when the child is developmentally ready to eat complementary foods, this is around 6 months of age. Complementary feeding should be adequate, meaning that it provides sufficient energy, fat, and protein and micronutrients to meet a developing child's needs. The complementary foods should be free of pathogens and contaminants, and it should be properly fed, given consistent with a child's signals of appetite and fullness, and that the meal frequency and feeding are suitable for the child's development and age. This is often referred to as a concept called responsive feeding. And responsive feeding can be measured and actually promoted. There's different ways to measure it through self-report questionnaires, through observations, And in some studies, like this one in Bangladesh, responsive feeding has been related to better child dietary diversity and to better growth, linear growth, actually, in rural Bangladesh. And the one last thing about this is UNICEF, as some of you might use or be aware of, has a community IYCF counseling package. It's the most widely used and adapted counseling package targeting IYCF practices. And research and adaptation has shown that this counseling package provides a valuable opportunity for integration and delivery of broader nurturing care services. So obviously it includes messages around nutrition and feeding, but it also includes messages about safety, security, and early learning within the context of delivering these IYCF counseling messages. This is just, they revised some of the counseling tools and guides. I think the revision was just in last year. So now I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about some research related to kind of this life course perspective and early exposures and also the nurturing care framework. The first thing I'm going to talk about is an impact evaluation that I was involved in Malawi. And this was a comprehensive stunting prevention program. The goal was to address the high prevalence of child undernutrition. So the Malawian government launched a comprehensive nutrition program with technical support from the World Food Program and World Vision, and financial support from the Child Investment Foundation, which is a donor in the UK. The program had a couple different components. It had a supplementary feeding component because this was done in a very food insecure population. So the supplementary feeding included small quantity LNS or lipid-based nutrition supplement, and it also included that was tied to a social behavior change communication campaign. So the supplement included energy or calories, protein, fat, and multiple micronutrients. The social behavior change communication strategy or campaign focused on infant and young child feeding practices and WASH, good WASH practices. It was delivered through group counseling, individual counseling, both at the facility and at the home. It was also delivered via radio and billboards and posters throughout the community. The goal, so my involvement is from Hopkins, I was part of the effort to evaluate the impact of the comprehensive nutrition program in reducing undernutrition in children from 6 to 23 months of age. This study was done in 2 rural districts in Malawi. So this orange district, Michizi, is the program district where the intervention was implemented across all the children in this district. And then the yellow is the comparison district. So it was very similar to the program district, but we did it in 2 different places so we could compare having the program versus not having the program. The study had multiple components. One was to assess the impact of the program on population nutritional status among all children in the population, 6 to 23 months of age. The second component was a more intensive component. It was a cohort study. So this allowed us to really look at the impact of full exposure to the program. So children who started the program at 6 months and ended the program at 23 months. So they got the full 18 months exposure to the program. So we could look at what full exposure did in terms of its relation with growth. And then finally, we were able to, after the program stopped at 2 years, we were able to go back 2 or 3 years later when the kids were in preschool and assess whether the program had lingering impacts, whether the impacts that it had at 24 months remained later in their life. So in terms of the cross-sectional component, so this is a population component. So The thing to note here is that children came in and out of the study at different ages. So some of the children may have had 6 months of exposure to the study or the intervention. Some may have had 2 months, some may have had 18 months, so it varied. And what we found at the population level was that this program reduced wasting, moderate acute malnutrition, it improved weight for length Z-score and an improved BMI Z-score. But it didn't have an impact on stunting or linear growth. So it improved weight indicators, but not length indicators. But like I said, we actually did a more intensive look. So we looked at the children who got full exposure to the study, not just 3 months or 4 months, but 18 months. All these children in the cohort study got 18 months of exposure, and we followed the same children over time. And basically what we found was that the children, when they started the program at 6 months, the children in the program district were a little worse off in terms of their length, their weight, and their MUAC scores. But by the time the program ended at 2 years of age, they had caught up to the comparison group. So their change in linear growth, their change in weight really was much better than that of the comparison and they even caught up. All right, so in the cohort study, we actually did see, in addition to weight impact, we saw impact on linear growth and a reduction in stunting. Then, like I said, we actually did an extended follow-up. So just remember the study ended, or the program ended at 2 years of age when they were 23 months of age. But the evaluation went through 3 to 4 years of age. So when we went back and looked at the children when they were 3 to 4 months of age, what we found was that the impact, the positive impact we saw on stunting reduction, it didn't exist anymore. They kind of went back to what they looked like earlier. However, we did see that the impact on weight remained. So it stuck even 2 years after the intervention. So in summary, I think what the study found was that the cross-sectional assessment of children 6 to 23 months revealed higher weights and less wasting at the end of the program versus the comparison district, but we saw no differences in the distribution of length for age or stunting. However, the children who received full exposure to the program for 18 months, we did see that they experienced not only greater weight gain, but also greater linear growth, and they had a reduced prevalence of stunting by 23 months of age. And then when we went back to see after 1 or 2 years after the program ended, what did they look like? We found that the program impact on weight indicators persisted, but the length gain made by 23 months were lost by 4 years.
Infak 15 apa 25 ya? Aku lupa. 15.000.
So in terms of the discussion, the reasons for the persistent impact on weight but not linear growth are kind of unknown. We don't know the real reasons. We didn't study that per se. But we think that it may be related to sustained increases in the child's appetite and continued gains in fat tissues over lean body mass as the children transitioned after 23 months back to their low nutrient dense maize-based diet. And that the implications of all this is that efforts should consider developing and evaluating nutrition programs that target children across their whole childhood, so from conception to adolescence, with a continued focus on nurturing care. So not stop at just 23 months of age, but continue to go on. So now I'm going to focus on the next study. So this is a 2-study cohort study. Looked at the mitigating effects of nurturing care in 2 longitudinal birth cohorts. This was a secondary data analysis. And it looked at it by integrating nurturing care and the life course perspective. So they looked at children exposed to nurturing care and looked at this along the span of childhood, so from preconception through adolescence. And the design was that in these two birth cohorts, so one was in Brazil and one was in South Africa. So they had data on risk factors that occurred during pregnancy or right at the child's birth. So they knew if, in terms of maternal well-being, they knew about household wealth, they knew about maternal education, maternal height, their age, their mental health, and they also knew about the child's weight, birth weight, gestational age, and their length at birth. So they had this information. So they knew if a child was exposed to risk factors related to this data. They also, when the children were 2 to 4 years of age, they were exposed to what they called nurturing care in the home. It was an intervention where they were exposed to responsive caregiving practices, including responsive feeding, and they were exposed to an intervention that focused on learning opportunities, providing learning opportunities to children. And then at adolescence, they looked at all these children and they evaluated what they called as human capital. And they defined human capital by looking at IQ during adolescence. They also looked at psychosocial adjustment during adolescence, and they looked at the adolescent's height to come up with a human capital indicator.
Okay.
And basically what they saw was that there were associations between early risk factors. So remember, these were looked at during pregnancy and birth, and there were negative associations between being exposed to early risk and then having lower human capital at the adolescent period. On the other hand, learning opportunities and responsive caregiving that was given, between 2 and 5 years or 2 and 4 years of age was associated with greater human capital during adolescence. So early environmental risks were bad, but then even among those, like kids exposed to those, giving them exposure to things like responsive caregiving and learning opportunities early in life made it better. And there was an interaction. So basically, that this association varied by this nurturing exposure. So children who were in a low nurturant environment, right? Children who had low nurturance and were exposed to risk factors like during pregnancy or birth, children did worse than those who were not exposed to risk factors early on. Whereas children in a high nurturant environment during this preschool age, even those who were exposed to risk factors early on, even those children did okay compared to those, they did as good as those that were not exposed to risk. So there is something about coming in and providing protective factors even after some risks have occurred. So basically, even if you have what this study showed, is there's challenges and issues here, they can definitely affect whether or not a child survives or thrives. But if you intervene along the way, it can actually make it better. So in summary, just for the whole presentation, I think just to summarize, I think it's clear that young children benefit from environments that promote nurturing care. However, principles of nurturing care extend from preconception through adolescence and can enhance resilience and promote well-being of vulnerable and probably the most marginalized groups. So nurturing care is very important during the first 1,000 days, but extends beyond it. And then integrating nurturing care and the life course perspective can guide how policies and programs in a country can increase protections and decrease risk. That all children reach their developmental potential,
Dulu
and that goals
suka aku
as
kayak gini.
Itu mah
sustainable
di-tension
development
tapi-
goals are met. So with that, I'd like to thank you again all for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions, or if anybody has comments or reflections, we'd also love to hear that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hurley, for that comprehensive and thought-provoking presentation. Okay, I'm Okta from the Directorate General of Primary and Community Health, Ministry of Health. I'm honored to moderate today's session. Thank you, Prof. Hurley, for the presentation. You explained that children need more than just survival. They need support to grow and thrive, and this can be done through the nurturing care, which includes good health, proper nutrition, responsive caregiving, safety, and also early learning. So the first 1,000 days of life are especially important for a child's brain and body development. And you also shared that feeding practice like responsive feeding, where caregivers pay attention to child's hungers and fullness, are key to both nutrition and bonding, right? So, and also you share about the programs that combine nutrition, health, and early learning, like those in Malawi, Brazil, and South Africa, show better growth and learning outcomes. So I think the main message about the start early, involve families, and also work across sector to help every child reach their potential. Thank you, Prof. Hurley. So before we jump into the question and answer, I'd like to briefly show how the nurturing care framework is being implemented in Indonesia. The government of Indonesia recognized that early childhood as a critical window of opportunity for lifelong development, and this commitment is reflected in presidential regulation number 60 year 2013 on holistic and integrative early childhood development, or we know PAUD HI. And this is the initiative that links the effort of the health, education, social welfare, and also parenting to meet the essential needs of young children. So we also have a national action plan for the PAUD HI 2020 and 2024 was developed to promote a coordinated service across sectors. And then in line with this, Ministry of Health leads the health sector's contribution to PAUD HI by embedding nurturing care into its primary healthcare transformation. This approach emphasizes life course in interventions starting from pregnancy and newborn health, also integrative promotive and preventive services at the community level, and strengthen the role of puskesmas and posyandu also. And the implementation of PAUD HI encore for component like nutrition, developmental stimulation, protection, including immunization, child protection, also evaluation through the regular monitoring of growth and development. And these services are integrated through tools like maternal and Catat handbook. We now buku KIA are delivered across all levels of the health system, from families, posyandu, through primary care centers, and also hospitals. So it is ensuring that every child. Yes, that's right. You have it. Okay, yeah. We have a buku KIA. Buku KIA have also strengthened to promote caregiver knowledge and engagement, which goes beyond health records. Is a communication tool for parents and providers, integrating growth monitoring, early detection, stimulation, and also responsive care. So this integrated the core component of the nurturing care framework into daily health practice. Thank you once again, Dr. Hurley. Now we will move into our interactive discussion. I would like to invite participants. Please raise your hand if you have a question, and also don't forget to turn on your mic and camera. Okay, the first Arini. Bu Arini, silakan. You can turn on your mic. Oh, we lost Ibu Arini. Or maybe other participant would like to.
Hello.
Oh, okay, please, Ibu Arini, silakan.
Okay, so thank you for the opportunity. So I want to ask about, I'm sorry, I cannot turn on my camera because it's something technical problems I have.
No
I
problem.
want to ask about one of your slide, Dr. Hurley. It said that the poor quality of elementary school also affect the brain function and behavioral competence. This is a mother question, I think. How can we say that it is a poor education? What character that make it rich or poor education? Is it always comes from it comes from a very expensive education, or we can achieve that rich education by something that
Yeah.
really low money? So this is a mother question for me. So
It's a
because
great
it will,
question. Yeah, thank you. It's a really good question. And as a mother myself, I'm always wondering the same thing. So,
yeah, I was wondering, is it the right education that I already give to my children, or
yeah,
it's still a poor education? That's my question.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So
thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. So my slides really, I mean, there is evidence that shows that early education or even education in elementary school does impact child, outcomes, especially cognitive outcomes and later, school performance and IQ and stuff. The studies that I showed mostly focused earlier than that. So when I talked about education was more in the preschool environment in the country. So it was even earlier than elementary school. So I think to answer your question, we all want our children to go to good schools and everything. And I think that is super important. And as a community, as a society, wherever we live, we should really be working with the key stakeholders to ensure that not only our children, but the other children in our environments get access to a proper education, the best that they can. So, but I would have to say that I think even beyond the formal education sector, probably more of the learning comes from the child's immediate environment. So their caregiving environment, the parental stimulation, the parental care, the parental, and their immediate family. So learning doesn't start in the school. Learning starts really, really early in life, even before children learn to talk. It's important to talk to them, to provide stimulation. I mean, they need that in order to develop their visual development, their audio, their speech, their language, and without those key kind of things, then they have a hard time later in life to do well in school, even if they go to the greatest school. So I think, that's kind of the nurturing care. And that's why also the life course perspective, like it's really, really critical to start early on. And sometimes that means focusing in on the family and focusing in on the parents and helping them to understand what early stimulation looks like or what communication looks like. And also to focus, if there is preschool in the environment, focus on that, and then go into elementary schools and beyond. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I do think, we should all be working to improve the formal education system, but also to support just a child's learning at the home and community environments as well, earlier than that. So, yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Hurley. Hopefully answered the question for Ibu Arini. Dr. Hurley explain about it's important to, that's why nurturing care and responsive parenting in the first years are so critical, for a child lifelong learning journey. Thank you. I would like to invite another participant, Ibu Elva, please.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Here.
Yes. Thank you. Hello, Professor Hurley. I want to thank you so much first because that was an awesome topic. I'm a worker and I'm a mom also. So that's why this is my curiosity too, like Mrs. Arani question before. This is the question about the pregnancy era. I think like you told us about all of the steps are important since preconception, pregnancy, and so on. And how it probably in pregnancy, the pregnant woman across some of that experience are willing. But after that, we still try to fix it after the situation. We try to continuously give stimulation, give a good nutrition, and sometimes as a worker and also mom, the children, and sometimes it's really hard to tell, and sometimes we are becoming angry. And after that, we realize we ask the sorry for the children. And what do you think about it? And could it be influence for developmental entry for our children? Thank you, Professor Hurley.
I think you're touching on a sensitivity that most parents and moms have, you know, the fear that we're not doing it just perfectly. We're human. So I kind of tried to, you know, we're going to do things that aren't perfect, that maybe we could have done better. But we're also doing things that are really good for our children. So, and you know, we all get stressed and angry and it happens, right? So, but I think more important is the balance. So it's the balance of, you know, exposure to these risk factors from multiple levels of a child's environment, from the mother, from the parent, from the school, from the community, from their family members. We want to throw at them more protection, like as much as protection. They're going to be exposed to risk factors. They're going to be exposed to an angry mom. They're going to be exposed to family stress, you know, even poor nutrition sometimes. Like, risk factors occur. They're going to have a bad teacher somewhere along the line, probably 2 or 3 of them. So like, it's okay. That's part of developing and growing too. But the more protection we can provide them, and the more, you know, people in the environment and systems in the environment that are protective, the better ultimately our children will be in terms of that, achieving that healthy trajectory. So I hope that answers your question, but I'm sure you're doing great in terms of parenting. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Hari, Ibu Elva. It's important to create the environment, yeah, Dr. Hurley, yeah, environment to support the potential of the of our child. I would like to invite another participant, Pak Homer, please. You can switch on your camera,
Hello,
possible? Okay. Silakan, Pak. Okay.
thank you. Hello, Miss Professor Hurley and Miss Dwi. Good afternoon. My name is Homer. Actually, I work for Health Ministry of Indonesia. My institution undertake responsibility for calibration health devices. But I'm also as a parent, I'm interested with the topic today. I'm going to dig deeper, a little bit information about your research in Malawi. You address research about comprehensive nutrition program, and I'm going to hear about if you have any information about the way or habits of people in Malawi, or the parents specifically, in addressing or ingest the nutrition for the child. And specific question is about, do you put intervention also for the parents or mother to address the program as well? That's all.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Hurley.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the question about the study in Malawi. It was a few years back, but it was really a learning experience for me. It was interesting. I got to spend some time in Malawi and work with several people there. So it was a good experience. And I also got to meet several of the research participants, and I'm grateful for them, you know, being part of our study. So in terms of, the area that we worked with in Malawi, it was the focus area because there was, and it actually, the study was right around a time when they had a big flood. So there was a lot of food insecurity, right? So that's why the program include a supplemental feeding part of it, because there was food insecurity. I think that there was knowledge about dietary diversity, breastfeeding rates were great, optimal breastfeeding behaviors were high, even exclusive breastfeeding was high in the community. Mothers and parents had a good idea on, what was like optimal in terms of their infant and young child feeding practices. It was more a concern at the time, especially because the flooding and things like that, was the food security and the ability for them to always provide, the dietary diversity that their children needed. So, that's why the focus included supplementary feeding, the SQ and LNS. But it's hard because that study, kind of the main thing I learned is, even if you provide a supplementary feeding, you have to figure out something that's sustainable, right? Like it stopped at 23 months of age, and then we saw a diminishing impact on their growth over time. So I think it's really important. It doesn't have to be, it can be, a local food, but it's important for across childhood for populations to figure out, if there's food insecurity, what policies or programs could be in place to try to mitigate that as best as possible. But we got really good information about actual practices. Parents were very aware of proper nutrition, and like I said, breastfeeding was high and things like that. Yeah. Hope that helped or answered.
Yes, Professor. That's why I asked about maybe you have information about the way parents in Malawi address the nutrition support to their child. So maybe I can compare with the mothers or parents' style in Indonesia. So we can also address best practice in Malawi, and we can address also in Indonesia. But all in all, the truth extended research actually, how the parents continue your research in the every single life for our child in nurturing our child. I think that's all very insightful. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Ms. Dwi. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Pak Homar. We will continue to the next session. Prof. Hurley, I would like to invite another participant, Ibu Enda. Ibu Enda, silahkan. Oh, salah, oke. Dari ini, OS, apakah ingin bertanya, Bapak, Ibu? Oke, belum ada ya, yang live hand. Oke, I would like to read the question from the chat Zoom. The first from Ibu Reta. Have there been studies on the most effective methods to support parenting practices that better promote adequate nutrition for children? Dr. Hurley, would you like to respond?
Sure. So studies that promote best feeding practices, is that what the question was?
Yeah, parenting practices that better promote adequate nutrition for children.
Yeah, there have been a lot of studies and a lot of even trials related to, it's related to testing different strategies. And some that I've been involved in India and Guatemala, the Malawi, and then some I know of in Jamaica, even Indonesia, have really focused on, on a couple components of feeding, right? Like there is just using optimal feeding practices like breastfeeding, appropriate complementary feeding practices. But given my interests, I've also integrated the kind of parenting caregiving into that as well, and also focused on the not just what you feed your children, but how you feed your children. So for example, in Indonesia and Guatemala, we had a strong, and you saw it in Bangladesh too, I was involved in that one, a very strong component on responsive feeding and how that translated to, when you talk about responsive feeding and how you kind of are developmentally sensitive and how you engage and model a child, like model eating for a child and all this stuff. It includes talking about food too. So yeah, like food is part of it, but you add that on top of it. And I find that parents really like learning about that. It's interesting, right? They want to know not just what, but how to do it too. So it's usually well received. And in some studies, like I talked about, like the responsive feeding has been associated with better growth and also better development. It's also been associated with less food refusal. So when kids are, 1, 2, they actually start refusing food, right? And oftentimes to counterbalance that, a caregiver will try to make them eat it because they're afraid that they're gonna not eat enough, but that often backfires. So these interventions really help to give caregivers other strategies to use that over time will help their child develop healthy food preferences and eating patterns, rather than continue to refuse different types of foods and stuff. So honestly, it's a fun intervention. It's to implement, and it has been tested. And I like it too because it also integrates the developmental component. So you're not just talking about food, but you're also talking about a child's normal development and what they can do and can't do and how to encourage them to develop. So yeah, I hope that answers. But there is a lot of research. If you just go in and search responsive feeding or early caregiving and feeding, you'll find a lot of trials have actually been tested. I think there's even a few systematic reviews that have pulled that data across different studies. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hurley. So many studies, to support the implementation about the nurturing care and also responsive feeding. Then the next question from Ibu Hera in the chat Zoom. What can be done in program to ensure timing of exposure during prenatal?
To ensure timing of what during prenatal?
Maybe Ibu Hera, would you mind to live us with us joining? Yeah.
Hi, Ibu Hera.
Kristen, I want to ask what ensure the program timing of exposure during prenatal
During
to make
prenatal
sure
period.
the mother can fulfill their nutrition
Requirements.
need.
Yeah, a great question. I know it's something that you and I have worked on a bit together. And I think that, the prenatal period is really important. It's that critical. It's important not just for the child's development or the fetus's development. It is because, exposure to a poor environment, including poor nutrition during that fetal period, can increase the risk of poor fetal development and growth and then negative birth outcomes, which can translate to poor outcomes later in childhood. But the prenatal interventions and nutrition is also important for the mother, right? Like her health is also a big part of that. So I think Indonesia's got a very strong antenatal care program, the Posyandu's and the Puskesmas, and from what I see, delivers a very comprehensive set of nutrition interventions and healthcare interventions for pregnant women. And, that is highly attended. ANC is attended by pregnant women, and some pregnant women also go to private services. So I think there is a lot of, positive things, opportunities for pregnant women to at least get the information and then the services they need to have a healthy pregnancy, which translates to, better health for them, lower anemia, and better birth outcomes. I also know that Indonesia is in the process of scaling up multiple micronutrient supplements for pregnant women, which is, it's a replacement for the standard of care, which is iron and folic acid, which is important, but the multiple micronutrient supplements have the iron and folic acid plus 13 other micronutrients that they need during their pregnancy that can be, the supplement can help them meet. And the multiple micronutrient supplement has been related to better birth outcomes as compared to the iron folic acid. So I think it's very exciting that the Ministry of Health, along with all their partners and Dr. Hara and Dr. Lovely and everybody has been very, very involved and instrumental in all the work it's taken to introduce and begin to scale this program to enhance a good system that they already have. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Bu Hera, for the question. For the last question from the chat Zoom, I will translate from Ibu Lia. Ibu Lia asks about how can we protect children from becoming overly dependent on gadget. Yeah,
Overly dependent on what?
gadget,
Gadget?
mobile phone,
Oh,
games
yeah.
like that. Yeah, yeah. In
That's
today's
that's a really hard question.
Yeah, because it's increasingly difficult to separate children from from screen time. Yeah, even school often require the use of gadget for learning, but over time, this become a reason for children to stay glued to their device, making it very hard for parents to control.
Oh,
Especially
I know. And then that actually leads to another nutrition problem, the overweight and obesity, and also poor health and bad posture and like low learning and lots of things. And it's a big problem. And, it's stressful for children to get all that input. I don't have an answer. I wish I did, because it's something, again, that I think all of us are encountering now. We didn't know what would happen with all those digital devices. So I think it's a really important area for healthcare providers, for communities, for policies to think about as we go on from here. I think we spent the last 10 years learning some of the positives and negatives about digital exposure. And now that we know, we need to address it. And I'm going to have to leave that up to the younger health professionals and researchers. It's a hard problem to solve. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hurley. And due to time limitation, we will wrap up this Q&A session here. Before we end, I'd like to invite Prof. Hurley to share a few final reflections for the closing statement for this session.
Yeah, no, just again, I really, really appreciated all the attendance. It's a very big audience, bigger than I'm used to. So I'm really appreciative of the interest and of, all the collaboration I've had over the last few years with all the stakeholders, important stakeholders in Indonesia, including folks from the universities, including the Ministry of Health, even other parts of the government as well. So it's been a really terrific working here in Indonesia, working with Vitamin Angels. I really love that experience too. There's a good team here that I know is involved with all of you. And I'm super excited to hear about the Patahi program and all of your work in nurturing care. So as always, Indonesia is kind of leading in terms of taking the newest evidence and figuring out how to apply it in terms of policies and programs. So I'm excited to continue to follow your progress in relation to nurturing care. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Hurley, for your inspiring closing word and also for the deep insight and generosity you share with us today. I think this session reminds us about that nurturing care is more than framework. It's a global call to action, that a commitment to see every child, not just as a recipient of service, but as a future change maker. So who deserve our collective supports. Indonesia, we're proud to move this agenda forward through initiative like PAUD HI, Buku KIA also, and the strengthening of primary healthcare and community-based services. So what matters most is turning evidence into action and action into equity. So for every child in every setting. Thank you once again to our speaker, all participants, and the organizing team. See you in the next session. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi dan salam sehat.
And
Thank you.
thank you for the wonderful moderation. I really appreciate it.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Prof. Hurley and Ibu Okta as moderator for the wonderful, insightful session today. I'm sure everyone learns a very insightful lessons to take home today from this global expert session. Let's give a virtual round of applause for our guest speaker and moderator. Bapak Ibu, kami juga mau mengingatkan setelah webinar ini, silahkan mengakses kelasnya di LMS masing-masing untuk mendapatkan sertifikat 1JP. Kami juga menyampaikan terima kasih yang sebesar-besarnya kepada panitia penyelenggara yang telah memastikan acara ini berjalan dengan lancar. Sebelum meninggalkan ruang Zoom, kami mohon kesediaan Bapak Ibu untuk menyalakan kamera untuk berfoto bersama. I will count to 3 for our virtual photo session. We ask the committee to help take the screenshots for us. 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. Panitia, apakah sudah oke?
Oke, Mbak.
Oke, terima kasih. Thank you. Dengan demikian, sesi ketiga dari Global Expert Session 3 ditutup. Dan sebagai penutup yang ceria, berikut saya akan memberikan sebuah pantun. Dibantu cakepnya ya Bapak Ibu. Makan nasi dengan sendok garpu.
Cakep.
Minumnya jus kedong-dong.
Cakep.
Sekian webinar Kemenkes CorpU. Pasti banyak manfaatnya dong.
MC-nya juga cakep.
Pamit undur diri. Sampai bertemu di lain
MC juga
kesempatan.
cakep.
Wassalamualaikum Bapak Ibu. Terima kasih.
Cakep, Mbak MC.
Thanks again.
Keberhasilan transformasi sistem kesehatan memerlukan dukungan sumber daya manusia Kementerian Kesehatan yang tangguh dan kompeten. Transformasi internal memerlukan pengembangan peningkatan kompetensi aparatur sipil negara di Kementerian Kesehatan melalui pengembangan Kementerian Kesehatan Corporate University. Kemenkes CorpU. Kemenkes CorpU mengintegrasikan sistem manajemen talenta, pengembangan kurikulum modern, rebranding, persiapan kampus, pengembangan kapasitas pengajar, serta benchmarking dengan 3 sekolah bisnis terbaik di Indonesia. Pengembangan kerangka kurikulum, pengembangan modul pembelajaran, dan penyiapan teaching tools didasarkan pada pendekatan pembelajaran sekolah bisnis dengan output oriented. Kurikulum manajemen leader Kemenkes CorpU memiliki 9 topik pembelajaran, 39 modul, 278 jam belajar, 16 plus 3 hari hadir dengan durasi 8 jam, dengan total waktu pembelajaran selama 34 hari. Metode pembelajaran dilakukan dengan pendekatan 14% classical lecture dan 86% non-classical lecture. Dengan modul pembelajaran meliputi materi strategic management, leadership and change management, decision making and problem solving, strategic communication and interpersonal skill, project management and execution, policy development and implementation, ethics and integrity, performance measurement, evaluation and data analysis, and also achieving service excellence. Metode pembelajaran non-klasikal dilakukan melalui studi kasus, role play, experiential learning melalui proses mentoring, supervised learning by coach, and independent work berdasarkan problem aktual di unit kerja masing-masing. Peserta program Kemenkes CorpU adalah para talenta terpilih Kemenkes yang bersumber dari talent pool hasil assessment. Melalui pengembangan Kemenkes CorpU, peran Balai Besar Pelatihan Kesehatan atau BBPK dan Balai Pelatihan Kesehatan atau Bapelkes akan semakin strategis dalam perwujudan implementasi Kemenkes CorpU. Inilah Kemenkes CorpU, wahana untuk mengasah dan meningkatkan kompetensi, mendukung transformasi kesehatan melalui pengembangan talenta birokrasi menjadi pemimpin yang berakhlak. Bersama Kemenkes CorpU, wujudkan Kemenkes hebat, Indonesia sehat.
Selamat datang dalam pembukaan pelatihan Managerial Leader Batch 2 Kemenkes Corporate University.
Bahwa organisasi yang baik sangat bergantung terhadap kehebatan orang-orangnya. Kita harus memiliki orang-orang yang bekerja di Kementerian Kesehatan jauh lebih hebat dibandingkan bukan hanya kementerian yang lain, tapi organisasi-organisasi lain yang ada di Indonesia. Itu sebabnya kenapa kita harus serius lagi membangun sumber daya manusia, dan itu merupakan pilar nomor 7 dari transformasi kita. Saya bilang, orang yang hebat itu punya budaya kerja dan budaya hidup yang berbeda dengan yang enggak. Yang saya ingin pesankan nomor 1, membangun manusia hebat itu sangat penting. Itu akan menentukan keberhasilan suatu organisasi. Yang nomor 2, manusia hebat itu kayak gimana? Itu yang punya budaya kerja yang hebat. Itu yang harus dibangun. Nomor 3, cara bangunnya gimana? Dilatih. Bukan diajari saja, harus dengan seorang mentor, bukan hanya seorang guru. Itu harus dilatih di tempat kerja, diberikan dalam bentuk contoh, dididik oleh seorang yang hebat budayanya, bukan orang yang hebat gelarnya. Saya ucapkan terima kasih ke teman-teman di CorpU ya, yang sudah membuat program yang menurut saya inovatif dan baru. Ibu dan Pak Bambang yang sudah membuat ini, saya berharap benar-benar teman-teman nanti bisa mendapatkan ilmu dan contoh yang sebaik-baiknya dan bisa membangun budaya kerja yang hebat untuk menjadi insan-insan Kemenkes yang hebat dan bisa membawa Indonesia tidak kalah hebatnya dengan negara-negara lain. Bahwa organisasi yang baik sangat bergantung terhadap kehebatan orang-orangnya. Kita harus memiliki orang-orang yang bekerja di Kementerian Kesehatan jauh lebih hebat dibandingkan bukan hanya kementerian yang lain, tapi organisasi-organisasi lain yang ada di Indonesia. Itu sebabnya kenapa kita harus serius lagi membangun sumber daya manusia, dan itu merupakan pilar nomor 7 dari transformasi kita. Saya bilang, orang yang hebat itu punya budaya kerja dan budaya hidup yang berbeda dengan yang enggak. Yang saya ingin pesankan nomor 1, membangun manusia hebat itu sangat penting. Itu akan menentukan keberhasilan suatu organisasi. Yang nomor 2, manusia hebat itu kayak gimana? Itu yang punya budaya kerja yang hebat. Itu yang harus dibangun. Nomor 3, cara bangunnya gimana? dilatih, bukan diajari saja. Harus dengan seorang mentor, bukan hanya seorang guru. Itu harus dilatih di tempat kerja, diberikan dalam bentuk contoh, dididik oleh seorang yang hebat budayanya, bukan orang yang hebat gelarnya. Saya ucapkan terima kasih ke teman-teman di CorpU ya, yang sudah membuat program yang menurut saya inovatif dan baru. Ibu dan Pak Bambang yang sudah membuat ini. Saya berharap benar-benar teman-teman nanti bisa mendapatkan ilmu dan contoh yang sebaik-baiknya dan bisa membangun budaya kerja yang hebat untuk menjadi insan-insan Kemenkes yang hebat dan bisa membawa Indonesia tidak kalah hebatnya dengan negara-negara lain.
Selamat datang di halaman gedung Adiatma Kementerian Kesehatan dan senang sekali kita dapat berjumpa kembali dalam acara peluncuran gerakan perubahan budaya kerja Kementerian Kesehatan. Tahun 2024 dicanangkan sebagai periode akselerasi transformasi internal Kementerian Kesehatan dengan meluncurkan 9 program akselerasi, di mana 2 diantaranya adalah peluncuran gerakan perubahan budaya kerja dan rebranding identitas Kemenkes,
Kami ingin sampaikan pada intinya bahwa reformasi birokrasi ini telah dilaksanakan di Kementerian Kesehatan dengan berbagai upaya agar Kementerian Kesehatan menjadi lebih adaptif dan cepat dalam proses pelayanan dan pengambilan keputusan. Ini yang penting bagi kita untuk melayani pada masyarakat.
Semua organisasi mulai dari kecil sampai besar ke level negara, kalau mau berhasil, itu orang-orangnya mesti beda kelas dengan organisasi-organisasi yang setara. Nah, untuk bisa merubah kualitas orang, ini mesti dibangun sistem budaya yang hebat, tinggi, yang tangguh.
3, 2, 1.
Untuk membangun budaya itu saya tahu nggak mudah dan butuh waktu lama, tapi harus dimulai. Saya punya waktu tinggal 8,5 bulan lagi, nggak apa-apa. Yang penting sistem budayanya mesti dibangun. Bapak Ibu, tolong pastikan budaya barunya Kemenkes ini bisa kita tularkan ke seluruh jajaran kita, 50.000 karyawan-karyawati kita.
Indonesia tengah mengalami periode bonus demografi yang terjadi hanya 1 kali dalam peradaban sebuah negara. Kita harus memacu kinerja dengan cepat untuk memanfaatkan peluang ini sebagai momentum Indonesia lolos dari middle income trap, menjadi negara berpendapatan tinggi, serta mencapai visi Indonesia Emas 2045. Di sisi lain, COVID-19 membuka mata kita akan transformasi yang amat diperlukan di bidang kesehatan. Lebih dari 300.000 kematian akibat stroke setiap tahun, 4.000 bayi wafat karena kelainan jantung bawaan, 5 juta balita hidup dalam kondisi stunting. Rakyat Indonesia membutuhkan akses dan kualitas layanan kesehatan yang lebih baik.
Sesuai dengan amanat Undang-Undang Dasar 45, bahwa setiap orang berhak memperoleh pelayanan kesehatan dan negara bertanggung jawab atas penyediaan fasilitas kesehatan yang layak. Berdasarkan mandat itulah Kementerian Kesehatan membentuk 6 pilar transformasi kesehatan yang menopang sistem kesehatan di Indonesia.
Transformasi layanan primer dari fokus mengobati menjadi mencegah, mengedepankan layanan promotif dan preventif berdasarkan siklus hidup di layanan primer amatlah penting.
Agenda penting lainnya dalam transformasi layanan primer adalah peningkatan kapasitas dan kapabilitas layanan primer. Ini kita lakukan karena kita harus menjangkau seluruh masyarakat Indonesia yang jumlahnya 280 juta orang di wilayah yang sangat luas. Kita lakukan melalui revitalisasi jejaring dan jaringan puskesmas, yaitu Pustu, Posyandu, Kader yang nanti akan melakukan kunjungan rumah, juga dengan jejaring dengan FKTP lainnya.
Transformasi layanan primer untuk screening penyakit menular dan tidak menular yang menjadi prioritas untuk penyakit menular adalah TBC, HIV, dan malaria. Dalam pencegahan dan pengendalian penyakit tidak menular di tahun 2023 dilakukan perluasan screening faktor risiko PTM yang diimplementasikan dalam integrasi layanan primer dan menjadi bagian dari paket manfaat JKN.
Transformasi layanan rujukan dari akses layanan kesehatan yang susah menjadi mudah.
Dengan sistem rujukan berbasis kompetensi yang kami kembangkan, mulai dari tingkat kabupaten, kemudian provinsi, sampai tingkat nasional, maka pelayanan-pelayanan terkait dengan kanker, jantung, stroke, urologi, dan kesehatan ibu anak bisa segera dinikmati oleh masyarakat kita, sehingga masyarakat tidak perlu berobat jauh-jauh hanya untuk mencari pelayanan prioritas tersebut. Dan ini kami persembahkan buat Indonesia.
Transformasi sistem ketahanan kesehatan dari industri kesehatan yang bergantung ke luar negeri menjadi mandiri di dalam negeri.
Melalui program transformasi ketahanan kesehatan, pemerintah terus berupaya memperkuat ekosistem industri farmasi dan alat kesehatan Indonesia, dimulai dari penelitian dan pengembangan, produksi, hingga jaminan pasar untuk penggunaan sediaan farmasi dan alat kesehatan dalam negeri.
Dari sistem kesehatan yang rentan di masa wabah menjadi tangguh, diperlukan penguatan kesiapsiagaan prabencana dan penanggulangan secara terkoordinasi dengan melakukan penyiapan tenaga kesehatan yang sewaktu-waktu diperlukan dapat dimobilisasi saat terjadi bencana. Transformasi sistem pembiayaan kesehatan.
BKPK berperan aktif dalam menyukseskan pilar